Welcome everyone to our webinar on employee-initiated moves. We're happy to have you joining us today. I am Gina Grover. I am a practice leader here at Weichert Workforce Mobility, and I am pleased to be joined by two experts in the field. We have LadyRose Kvitek from CSG, and we have Birgit Maher from Cargill. And I want to thank you both so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you.
Absolutely. LadyRose, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, my name is LadyRose Kvitek. I am the manager of global mobility and immigration here at CSG International. We are a software billing IT implementation company based out of Denver, Colorado. I live in Austin, Texas. I've been with CSG for about 2.5 years, have been in global mobility for about 8 years, and my background is in U.S. immigration. Happy to be here.
Great, thank you. Great. And Birgit.
My name is Birgit Maher. I'm a senior global mobility specialist based in the EMEA region. I'm working for Cargill. Cargill is a global agricultural food company. They're based in Minneapolis, Minnesota, headquartered. But we have about 70 locations around the world, and we have a global footprint of 160,000 employees. That includes also plant workers, but you can see it's a vast company. So hence, we have quite significant amounts of employee-initiated moves.
I bet you do. I bet you do. So just a little bit of housekeeping before we get into the meat of the webinar. This is a recorded webinar. However, you can put your questions in the chat and we will answer those questions personally after that webinar has aired. Please feel free to use that chat feature. And then after the webinar, towards the end, we will have a QR code for you to scan and you can download the results of our employee-initiated research and get all the details that we'll be talking about today. So with that, let's go ahead and jump into the webinar. What the topic of this webinar is, obviously, is employee-initiated moves. And we were getting a lot of questions from our clients asking us what other companies are doing for employees who asked to be moved. So we thought, hey, this is a good opportunity for us to do some research. So what we did is we surveyed about 60 companies and really ask them, what are you doing and how are you supporting employees when they ask to be moved somewhere? So today we're going to share our findings and tap into the experience and expertise that Birgit and LadyRose have and, share some of the insights that we have into those types of moves. From the survey, a couple of key takeaways that we had were employees are really asking for these moves to be closer to family. That's the overwhelming thing. It's maybe a byproduct of the pandemic, people wanting to be closer to their family. We're also seeing that employers are granting these moves because they want to retain talent. They see the value in keeping their employees happy. So those are a couple of key takeaways. We also found that companies are responding to these employee requests inconsistently. They're really looking at it on a case-by-case basis. So there are some opportunities there for companies to maybe formalize the process. So we'll be talking about that and how CSG and Cargill have taken that under consideration and formalized their process a little bit. I want to start with you, LadyRose, and tell me a little bit how you support employee-initiated moves.
Yeah, so we have also been seeing at CSG kind of the same trends with all that data and percentages that you have just discussed. And we do support employee-initiated moves because of the change in the types of relocations that we've been seeing, and it hasn't been just straight permanent transfers and assignees. We've really changed our policies to kind of adhere to these requests and the different types of relocations that we're seeing. And with employee-initiated moves, again, we do support our employees with those requests. The approval rate's pretty high, but we do support our employees when requesting to move to other countries. A lot of our workforce is remote. We've been remote even prior to the pandemic. So it's more so not just like working from a different location or working virtually, it's more so requesting to work from other countries. So we do support from an immigration perspective and a tax perspective.
Okay, how about you, Birgit?
Yes, we certainly do as well. And we've certainly seen a big shift in our type of assignment since the pandemic. Pre-pandemic, we saw one or the other employee-initiated move. And then during the pandemic and continued since then, the employee-initiated move numbers have increased substantially. Just to give you an idea, so last financial year, we had we call them permanent transfers. We had 220 permanent transfers, and over half of them were employee-initiated moves. So a significant increase in that number. We do support employee-initiated moves, and they come really across all levels, from your senior manager to lower-level employees, and predominantly with the reason to return back home to the original country they came from, joining family, or following a partner or a spouse that has relocated. So we really consider every move, but we have an approval process, and we always have to involve our tax teams, corporate tax in particular, to assess the case, to ensure there is no, we call it permanent establishment risk, by an employee doing their current role from another location, from another country. So we do support it, but it has to be going through an assessment and then has to be approved first by our corporate tax department. And once we are given the green light, then we can connect with the managers and really handle the permanent relocation.
And how about you, LadyRose? What is the process for somebody to request a move?
Yeah, so we have a pretty robust approval process, and depending on, the nature of the relocation. So if it's low cost to high cost or high cost to low cost, kind of depends on how that process goes. If it's low cost to high cost, it's a bifurcated approval process where finance actually has to approve of that compensation change and that delta from low cost to high cost. And then after that, our SVPs or our business leaders, we kind of have an approval chain, but primarily it's our SVP that has to approve of the relocation. We also have business requisition form that needs to be completed that has all the details on the home country, the host country, all the business leaders involved, HR business partners. It has the compensation change and recommendation by the team, what that package would look like, as well as a pretty robust business justification. We've had business leaders that have said, this is not enough. Just by saying we want to retain talent, that's not sufficient. We need more information. So details about what they're doing, their skills that they have, so customers or clients that they support, and if there's any kind of financial impact to not retaining this resource, the employee is really critical to getting the employee-initiated relocation approved.
How often are you finding that you aren't able to honor those requests?
Yeah, that's a great question. But I would say that out of all of our relocations, and just like Birgit, I would say half of our relocations are employee initiated, right? Definitely about 50%. And most of them are to countries where we do have entities, but every once in a while it's a request to work in a country where we do not have an entity. And those are the ones that are, I would say, 50-50 approved 50% of the time. We do support. We have, if it's a very high performer, a very valued employee, we do support employee-initiated moves to countries where we don't have entities. And that's where we do engage with our employer of record, also known as a professional employment organization or global employment organization. Yes, it's, it is a little bit more money, but the business has deemed that it's worth it to retain certain employees in countries where we don't have entities.
I think, Birgit, you mentioned that you see employees across all levels asking for these employee-initiated moves. And in our study, we saw that as well. About 49% said they saw it across all different levels. How about you, LadyRose? What are you seeing in that regard?
I would say the same. I think it's definitely across all levels, but I would say not executives, but below executives, but across all levels, individual contributors, managers, but not as much with executives.
Okay. Now, in our survey, 53% of companies indicated they don't have a specific policy for employer-requested moves and that each move is evaluated separately. Birgit, do you have a specific policy that you use for these employee-requested moves?
Yes, we do. And we're currently actually in the process of reviewing it. So we have what we call currently a permanent transfer policy, which addresses a current Cargill employee moving from their current employment country to a new country. So that also covers the business-driven moves, the skills gap, so the people that apply for open positions in other countries, as well as the employee-initiated moves. And often there is obviously sometimes a fine line between employee-initiated, retaining talent. Yes, they bring the skills. So sometimes even though a move is employee initiated, it can also be a combination of, yes, we want to retain the talent, and yes, we have the skills gap, and we do need to retain them, and so we're supporting it. So the permanent transfer policy really covers, as I said, also the other moves, the business-driven moves, but we're currently reviewing it and want to establish also an employee-driven personal request move sub-policy in that, because we've seen the numbers really increase drastically. And with that review will come also a review of the relocation benefits that we provide. So at the moment, because it falls under the sort of standard permanent transfer policy, it really was upon manager approval what we provide, even to employee-driven moves. We always provide the compliance benefits, which are immigration for the employee and the family, as well as tax support, which is a tax briefing, and we even include tax return support. But then managers could also add on other benefits like temporary accommodation or shipment of goods. And so we want to, with the policy review, really, when we assess this is a true employee-initiated move, there's no business reason at all for this employee to move to that country. It's purely for family reasons, personal reasons. Whilst we allow an employee to move country and location, and retain the talent, we really want to sort of scale down the benefits that we provide and keep it at the compliance mandatory relocation benefits only.
Sure. How about you, LadyRose? What are you providing to those requests?
Yeah, similar to Birgit, we have a permanent transfer policy, but as we saw our international relocations double in number due to employee-initiated moves, about 2 years ago, we changed our permanent transfer policy, and we just pretty much expanded it, right? And so we have 3 tiers, similar to Cargill's, where we have tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, where that goes kind of employee-initiated, open role requisitions, and then business initiated. And then of course with each tier comes with different relocation benefits, and the packages increase with each tier. But for employee initiated, if it is strictly employee initiated, we also support with compliance. So immigration benefits for the employee as well as their dependents. And then, tax services, but by tax services, it's strictly just a tax consultation in their home and host countries.
Okay, so no tax prep, just the consultation.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. So we've talked a little bit about how your programs have evolved, and Birgit, you mentioned that you are working on devising a specific policy for these employee requested moves, and you're getting a lot more requests for these employee requested moves. How do you see, maybe the 2.0 version of your program, where, if you had your dream version of employee initiated moves, what do you think that looks like?
Oh, the dream version is obviously, first it starts off with, you have to really determine the move purpose. The employee initiated, it's okay, it doesn't really fulfill a business purpose at all. Then we'll have to go through the process of the permanent establishment risk assessment with our corporate tax team. And then once that's all approved, we go over to, yes, we can facilitate your relocation to that country. We are working with our compensation teams to set base salaries that are driven by local base market data, because we really want to align them like locals, and we want to compensate them to fit into the local labor market and also for internal equity. And then we obviously add on the very limited relocation benefits that I just mentioned to be compliant with immigration and taxation. So that's the dream policy, I'd say, to keep it really quite slick, but yet we fulfill all the compliance items.
Okay. How about you, LadyRose? What's your dream policy?
Specific to employee-initiated moves, to be honest with you, I think it's going pretty well so far.
Great.
Our approval process is going great. The business is really happy with, the transparency within that. and how that's moving along. And we have done surveys with all of our different types of relocations just to make sure that our employees are happy with, the packages and the relocation benefits that they're receiving and the services. And the employees are really quite happy with CSG being able to work with them and being able to support them, for the reasons of their request, and supporting them from an immigration perspective. And I forgot to mention earlier that, and sometimes depending on which country they're moving from and to, they don't always require global mobility benefits. And of course, the tax is always that standard, but they might not always require immigration benefits,
Sure.
right? Especially if they're repatriating to their home country, or they're like, let's say, moving within the EU, et cetera. And for those moves, we do assist with different relocation benefits, like maybe travel or corporate housing, et cetera. So we're able to be a little bit flexible in the benefits that we provide our employees, but everybody seems to be quite happy. And I think that they're just happy that they stay with CSG and keep working with our organization, which they love, and being able to, join families or support families, et cetera. So I think that as of right now, it's going pretty well.
Great. That's good to hear. In terms of the employee-initiated moves, and is there any kind of socialization of the opportunity to move? Do you tell your employees, hey, if you want to move, you just ask us and we can support that? Or is it, kind of something that the employee would have to come up with on their own? You're not really advertising the fact that we would support you to move somewhere else. How about you, LadyRose?
We're definitely not advertising.
Okay.
If they have the question, of course, they go to their hiring manager or their HR business partner, and that's kind of where that conversation usually comes from. And then the business will come to Global Mobility, and we'll kind of talk about the process and kind of walk them through what steps they need to take. And sometimes employees will come to us first, especially if they already have a relationship with us, and be like, hey, I'm thinking about this. Can you tell me how this works? But we're definitely not advertising it. I feel like if we were to advertise it, our numbers and employee initiated relocations would just skyrocket.
Sure.
But we're definitely working on kind of that remote workforce and that policy, which is a whole different webinar. But we're working on that and how to communicate that to our business and to our employees, knowing that we want to be flexible, but we still have to set guardrails.
Sure. How about you, Birgit?
Really similar to LadyRose. We don't advertise that. Again, we would be inundated with people wanting to move left, right, and center, and maybe move to sunnier countries that they prefer to live in and work from. So sometimes the request comes directly to Global Mobility, but we always refer them back to first discuss that with their direct line manager. And then the direct line manager, obviously, their role has to be feasible to be done from a different country remotely. So not all roles really can be done. And then, yes, the manager then, if the manager supports, would connect with Global Mobility team really for the assessment. Is it possible? And we do the risk assessment. Then we also look at the cost, and even just with the compulsory costs or the compulsory benefits that we provide, immigration for employee and family where required, and the tax support, it often still amounts to quite a significant amount because they're all taxable benefits when you add on the tax. So often managers don't realize, actually, that is still going to cost about 30, 40K to move this person, just providing the immigration and the tax support. And often then we get into negotiations. What can we still take away, or what must we provide? So that's where we are. But we certainly don't advertise it. But we also have another. So when we're talking about this, is sort of people asking to move permanently to another location. But we also have people that say, okay, my spouse has been seconded on assignment for 2 to 3 years. I'd like to join my spouse and continue doing my role, but this is temporary. So we wouldn't really localize those people onto a local contract in the country they're going to. Those employees would fall under what we call a remote worker assignment policy. So we have a separate policy for that, where they remain on their home country, payroll, base pay, everything, that they just work out of the host location for a limited period of time. And again, we still have to do this personal establishment risk assessment with corporate tax, in particular for some of our businesses, the trading businesses, commercial activities, negotiations on contracts with customers. So those roles generally could create a risk and cannot be done from the host location. And Those remote worker assignments, we provide very limited support. Again, only the immigration where required and any tax consulting and tax return support, but only if required. But that's it, because we assume they're joining their spouse on assignment, or the spouse is maybe on a local contract, but everything will be covered by the spouse or the partner or whoever they're joining. Yeah.
Yep, exactly. So you both have programs that are pretty well established. It sounds like you have the processes down. It's a well-oiled machine for the most part. What advice would you have for somebody who is, asking the question, what other companies do? What should I be doing? What do you think the first step in the process should be, LadyRose?
I definitely think that solidifying a process is really important. I feel that if this is going to be something that your business is going to support, employees will jump on the opportunity and the numbers of relocations will increase. And so just being able to compartmentalize like the whole process and just being like, here's our process, this is our approval process, but also making sure that you know who you need buy-in from, right? And just making sure that you have all like the right people at the table to have those conversations so that you know who needs to be kind of involved in the process, who needs to be aware, who needs to be kind of reached out to at certain steps throughout the process, so that when you are guiding the employees, the managers, HR business partners through that, you know exactly where you need to go and who they need to talk to, I think is really important.
Sure. How about you, Birgit? What advice do you have?
Yeah, again, similar what LadyRose already just said, important to have a process established, have the stakeholders, important stakeholders all involved. Like, it's not just the direct line manager or the HR business partner who say, yeah, we really need to retain this talent. We must facilitate this move. Otherwise, this employee may leave us. And it's difficult to, recruit, find a replacement. If, for example, corporate tax has assessed it's creating very, very high risk for the company, we have had to decline employee-initiated moves, for example. So it's very important to have this process in line, have the right stakeholders, the buy-in as well. And I think also it's important to have awareness of cost. So, and I think that's often little awareness. A lot of managers, business HR partners may think, it's not going to cost much. Even an employee thinks, I'm going to relocate myself anyway. It's not going to cost anything. I don't need immigration. But there's still the element of, you're moving maybe in a split tax year. There is maybe some trailing short-term incentive or long-term incentive liabilities that would impact taxes. So that's why we provide a tax support, which is a cost to the company. And hence, there is always cost involved when someone is moving. Even if the employee says it won't cost anything, I will have moved anywhere on my own.
Right. So how do you share those costs with the HRBP or the manager? Do you provide a cost estimate, or how do you make them aware that there is a substantial amount of money involved?
Yes, we do a cost estimate for all those employee initiated. And in fact, every other assignment type of move, we work on a cost estimate that will also then clearly show, the immigration fees for the employee and the family, the tax fees and the taxes on those provisional benefits. So, and then the manager really has a good overview as well for budgeting. And often such a move also requires manager +1 approval as well.
How about you, LadyRose? Do you share costs with the manager?
Yeah, we do.
Yeah.
And on our business requisition form that has to be completed, if there's a blank space, I'm like, you need to fill this in, because it's just the more information, the better. And we don't have to go back and forth on getting everything approved. But yeah, all the costs are in there. Getting that comp information, that comp package, what that looks like in the new country is very important, because of course there's different benefits and there's different employer burdens, and what does that look like? So that's really important, as of course, all the compliance requirements that we support. And even from an immigration perspective, if you just say, hey, this time it's going to cost $5,000, it's not just $5,000, right? We know that it's going to be ongoing costs, because, well, how long does it take in the country that they're going to file for permanent residency? How many years is that going to take?
Yeah.
Is that going to be 5 years? Is that going to be more than that? When do we need to renew that work permit? If that work permit's only valid for 2 to 3 years, are we going to to need to renew, right? How many dependents do they have? And so it's really kind of this long-term plan of, it's not just one-time fee, is that you're looking at what it's going to cost over the next 5, 7, maybe even 10 years. And then, Cargill's policy to support tax filing services, that's amazing. That's very generous. And we only support with the consultation, which kind of makes it a little bit more of a flat fee. But when you look at tax filing services, those are also ongoing, right? Especially when you're talking about mid-tax year moves, country splits, you're talking about commission, bonus payouts, when those were paid, where they were earned. I mean, and we know that with whatever tax provider you're working with, it's not just a one-time fee. There's out of scope fees that are going to continue, especially if it gets quite complex, and the higher level of the employee as well.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice, saying that, it's not just a one-time fee. It's going to be an ongoing thing when it comes to immigration and tax consultation, tax prep, that type of thing. So I think that's a really good takeaway.
Overestimate. I always overestimate. And whatever I think it's going to be, I add like another 5, because I'd rather overestimate than underestimate.
Yeah, you don't want any surprises down the road, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
Now, you both mentioned making sure you have the right stakeholders involved. Can you give an example of which stakeholders you work with in, granting these employee-initiated moves? Birgit, who are you working with?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, always the direct line manager is the first point of call for an employee to discuss. Can they even do the role from another location? Often that direct line manager would already discuss with the manager on above. The business HR partner is very heavily involved. And then really also pending, I think, on the level, let's say we would have an executive, team member or senior manager. We then have also obviously compensation teams involved, our equity teams, mostly they would have long-term incentives. And then it goes up to not just the business HR partner, but it could be the enterprise HR executive and also enterprise leads. So really depending on the level and of the approval. So those are the main stakeholders, are the internal sort of the business, and then we have the corporate tax. And then we obviously have our other internal tax teams. So there is often quite a lot of stakeholders involved to facilitate a move.
Sure. About you, LadyRose, who do you have involved?
Yeah, I feel like in global mobility, we just work with everybody, like literally everybody.
Right.
But for the approval process, of course, it's the hiring manager and the HR business partner. Global mobility actually has to approve of it as well. So we have to approve of the relocation. And then it goes up to the SVP. The SVP has the final approval. But then just for awareness, we also have to loop in our VP of Total Rewards as well as our CHRO, just so that they're aware of the numbers, why we're supporting, and the nature of these moves. They don't need to approve it, but they just need to be involved once it's finalized. And then once the employee is actually ready to start in that new country, that could be anywhere from a month later to like a year later, I oversee the summarizing of the relocation and making sure that everything's taken care of, no matter if it's a tier, like an employee initiated or a business initiated. But then I kind of loop in all the parties. So I'll loop in the manager in the home and host country, HR business partner in the home and host country, payroll on both sides, IT, equity, and benefits, just to make sure that everybody's on the same page and that, we're switching out equipment if necessary from an IT perspective. Benefits understands kind of when we're ending those benefits, when we're starting new benefits. Payroll, same thing, just to make sure, because I can't keep track of, okay, can we start mid-month, or should we, we always like to start on the first of the month, but is it okay to start mid-month? Is that going to impact anything? So anywhere from about 4 to 6 weeks prior to the actual relocation start date is kind of when I loop in all those parties.
Okay. Sounds like you had a lot of people that you're keeping in the know. That's good, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
No surprises.
And similar in our area, and I didn't mention all our support functions behind the scenes too. So what I mentioned earlier was really sort of the approval process by the business. But then once it's approved, it really goes through to our support centers that will then liaise with home country payrolls, host country payrolls, onboarding, notifications for the IT equipment, for the onboarding, for the office space, for everything really. Yeah, that's quite a lot of people involved to really end the contract in one country and start the new contract in the new country.
Right. Yeah.
I really feel like global mobility is the connector.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah. Kind of the hub, right? And everything is going out from there, right?
Yeah. And I also like to call out, we only ever do this for the first of the month. So we don't do any mid-month. So it has to be really clear cut off also from our systems point of view.
Easier.
Yeah. And what I also maybe didn't mention before is, and LadyRose, you mentioned that you even allow employees to move to locations where you don't have a legal entity. So that's something that we sometimes occasionally also get, which is a lot more complicated, because if you don't have a legal entity in the country the employee wants to move to, you can't really issue them with a Cargill employment contract. There's no payroll. So we are sometimes having to discuss, can we employ this person in another country? That then creates additional tax issues. Sometimes we say it's not possible to employ you in that country. So we haven't really gone down the route what you have to go via a third party, I think, to employ them.
An employer of record.
An employer record, yeah. So we haven't gone down that route yet, but maybe that's something for us to also look into in the future.
Yeah, great. So I want to end our conversation with a scenario and get kind of your take on this scenario, and I'm going to read it here so I make sure I get all the details. So I want you to meet Dan. Dan works in cybersecurity department for a large financial organization in their downtown Chicago headquarters. He recently asked for a transfer to the EMEA regional office in Denmark. However, there isn't a role available for him there. Dan has critical skills that aren't easy to find, and it easily takes a newly hired employee in his field 6 months to fully learn the organization's systems. There are only 5 individuals in the entire company with a comparable skill set to Dan's, and only one other individual in Chicago alongside Dan. Based on your organization and the stakeholders that you work with, what is the likelihood that Dan's transfer would be approved? Is it highly likely, somewhat likely, or absolutely not? LadyRose, what do you think?
I would say it's highly likely.
Okay.
But in terms of like maybe what other information we might need, well, one, I would need to know if Dan is a Cubs fan. Just kidding.
A very important question.
Yeah, that's very important. But no, I think that the business would ask if we've kind of tackled any recruitment efforts in the country to see if it's really a skill that's needed and if we're unable to find any local employees in Denmark. But I would say that this would be highly approved, but also kind of going into exactly what are the critical skills that he has, how long he's been with the company, is there a customer or a client that he is supporting that requires him to be in this region? And then, of course, like going through the costs and the compensation details.
And Birgit, before I get your take on this, I just wanted to loop back. LadyRose, you mentioned, it depends on how long he's been with that company. Is that a big factor in making your determination? Is it, you have to be with the company X number of years? What kind of weight does that carry in your decision?
Yeah, there isn't like a set threshold, but
Okay.
I think that if somebody were with us for like 6 months, that's definitely something that we wouldn't consider. We would definitely want them to have been with our organization for a substantial period of time so that we know exactly how they're performing and their contributions to the company. So again, like not a junior employee, definitely not less than a year, but anything more than that we would consider, especially based on critical skills that they have and those skills being rare. We highly support skill-based relocations. That's a big part of our relocation program. So this would be highly approvable.
Okay, great. All right, Birgit, what do you think? Would you approve Dan's request?
I'd say highly approvable, possibly, yes. But I think we need to have a few more assessments and facts.
Okay.
So first of all, as I said, there's no suitable role for him available in Denmark, but could he continue doing his current position remotely from Denmark? So the position he currently has in the US. If the answer is no, that's not possible, he would have to find a new position, but there isn't one, obviously, in Denmark. Then again, it really is down to the critical skills he's got, and there's only 5 employees and they want to retain him. So the manager may want to create even a position located in Denmark. So we have seen this as well, that they open up positions, maybe then, for a similar role that would cover the EMEA region, for example, or in Denmark. So we need to ask a bit more questions about the content of the role. Would they be open to create, for example, a role? Then the next question is also, do we have a legal entity in that host location? As I mentioned, if there isn't one, it's going to be a bit of a problem. We'll have to maybe work around that, or maybe it's not possible. But I think if all the boxes are ticked, either he can continue his current position from Denmark, or management would create a new position just to be, covering maybe Denmark or EMEA region, in effect creating a new role for him. Maybe he would have to apply to that, but obviously, go through the recruitment process. And if we have a legal entity in Denmark, then I think the chances are very, very high that this would be approved.
Great. Sounds like Dan's going to move to Denmark. And it sounds like you both are really, open to working with the employee if they made the request. You want to look at all the possible solutions. You're asking the questions, okay, well, if this doesn't exist, maybe we can do this. So it's really shows that you're willing to work with the employee, you're being flexible, and ultimately you want to retain that. So with that, I am going to go ahead and thank you both so much for being part of our webinar today. And once again, as a reminder, you can go ahead and put your questions into the chat, and we will answer those on a personal basis. Also, we will have the QR code up there for you. Go ahead and scan that, and you can download the report. Once again, thank you both, and thanks for everyone for joining.